If you're making minimum wage or you want to make a lot more money and you're just tired of not making enough and you think that you need a degree, I'm here to tell you, you don't need a degree. The job I'm going to talk about is AI proof and recession proof, and they are always hiring. So stay tuned. I'm ex-military. I was in the Navy for a few years. And then after that, I joined the Army for a few years. And then after that, I got out and I moved to a city called Salt Lake City, Utah. And the reason why is because there was a burial site that takes radioactive hazardous waste, if it's mixed waste, and they treat it. And then after they treat it, they sample it, they analyze it to make sure that it meets certain specifications, and then they can bury the waste in the ground. Okay. Now, but when I first got there, I did not know anything about nuclear waste, radioactivity, nuclear energy, things of that nature. And I'm sitting in class. We had to go through a class called Red Worker, and I had no clue what I was going to, go through. And I was kind of nervous, to be honest with you. So I'm sitting in class, and there was one other guy in there. So there's only two people, me and this other guy. And he looks at me and he says, "Well, what are you here for? What are you going to be doing? What's your position?" And I said, "I'm going to be a treatment technician." Meaning I'm going to, and he said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, based on the job description and things of that nature, I'm going to be working in the treatment building, forklift driving, unpackaging waste boxes, moving boxes around that have waste in it and treating waste, all day and night, what have you, so we could bury it." That's just all I knew. And he looks at me and he said, or he asked me, he said, "Well, how much money are you going to make?" And I said, $10.50 an hour. Now, mind you, this was in 1998, so that's actually pretty good money back then. 1998, I was getting out of the military. If anybody's ever been in the military, you know that the money's not the best, but the benefits are good, but the money's not very good. So $10.50 an hour, I'm thinking, hey man, I hit the gold mine, right? I did it. I hit the lottery. And so I looked at him because, he got me curious. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And he says, "I'm an RP." Now, at the time, I didn't know what that meant. Later on, I did. But at the time, I said, "Well, so what do you mean an RP? Like, what do you?" He said, "Well, I'm an RP. I work in the radiation field." And I said, "Okay." I said, "So, how much money are you going to make?" Then he asked me, and I asked him, "How much are you going to make?" And he said, "Twice what you're making." Now, mind you, he could have just said $21 an hour. No, he had to say twice what you're making. I don't know if he meant anything by that, but that's just how he said it. And I thought to myself, wow, $21 an hour? Like RP, like what is an RP? That was my goal. Now I want to be an RP. I didn't even know what it was. And I wanted to be an RP because it didn't matter. I wanted $21 an hour. So I found out that RP stands for radiation protection. And I thought, that's something. That got me interested. Let's put it that way. So at that point, my goal in life was to be an RP to make a lot of money. Okay. So I started reading about radiation, the different types of radiation, the alpha, beta, gamma, neutrons, how they interact with matter. I mean, the nerdy stuff, I started reading all about it and I started getting a better understanding of how radiation works and how we can, how we protect ourselves from it and what we can do to, minimize our exposure once we're around it. So I started, really getting into this stuff. To be honest with you, I started getting so interested in it that, I started reading about it even on the weekends when I was at home, and from there, I did move over. I got interviewed and I moved over to the safety department. So I went from being a treatment technician in the treatment building, working nights and day shift and such, to being a safety inspector at the site, which was a good move on my part. I got a pay raise and such. But my goal still was, RP. I wanted to be a radiation protection technician. That was my ultimate goal. And then after being in safety for about a solid year, my risk manager boss came up to me one day and he says, "Hey, would you like to be an RP?" And I almost cried, I'm like, well, yeah, I've been reading about this stuff for 2 years now. I definitely want to be an RP. Yes. So I became an RP. And they taught me how to use all the instruments. They taught me how to go and do radiation surveys. You have these little round white disc smears. You have to go take smears looking for loose contamination. They taught me how to, pull an air sample to see if there was airborne contamination, and on how to also take that air sample and put it on a meter and read it to find out if there's any activity in the air. And if there's so much activity in the air, then you have airborne. And if you have airborne, you have to put on a respirator. So I got like really into all this, and they showed me everything I needed to know. And once I learned all the instruments and how to do job coverage and such, I did start off as a junior radiation protection technician, which is how it starts. You have to be a junior. And then after 2 years, I was promoted up to senior, and then I started making more money. But even as I became a senior, I went on the road. I left the company and started to become a contractor, if you will. And, as a contract, because at the time we used to have contract people come through that were RP, and they were telling me all these stories about how they were making all this extra money as a contractor, working overtime, getting per diem, getting rental cars, and I thought, man, that's the life. I want to do that because I could be an RP and I can make more money. So that's what happened. I left the company on good terms. They told me I could come back whenever I wanted. I was always welcome back. I went on the road and just started traveling around the world or America and as an RP. And I started working at sites. I don't know if you're familiar, but like the movie Oppenheimer. So that was at Los Alamos. It's a Department of Energy site in New Mexico. And I started working at all of these Department of Energy sites, and I got a lot more experience doing that. And then from there, one time I went to my boss at a place I worked at, and I said, hey, I would like to be a trainer. Could I do that? And he said, well, sure, why not? Next thing you know, I'm the training coordinator for RP. So, and then from there, it just kept going and took off. And ever since then, I've been a trainer. So the moral to the story is there are jobs out there. There are six-figure jobs out there all over the place. What I do for a living is, I'm paid very well as a RP. I have went to school since then and got my degree. I just finished my master's, but at the time I did not need it. You do not need to have a degree as an RP technician, radiation protection technician. But I became a trainer. And the ironic thing about this whole story is that I went from in 1998, not knowing what an RP was, to about 14 years later, something around there, to training RPs and teaching RPs on what to do. So I went from not knowing anything to training RPs and telling them, teaching them what to do, to be successful. So if you ever think that you can't find a job and there's nothing out there, check with me. I can give you some ideas. Hit the like button. I'd appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you guys on the next video.